I remember the first time the king looked at me and did not look away. It was a slow unburdening of trust, placed upon mine. Authority came naturally, it steadied me. Courtiers bowed, scribes recorded, satraps deferred. I saw my hand upon the crown. The king entrusted me with decrees. I was chosen. They feared me, a language I learned to speak. Nobles measured themselves against me. I walked palace halls, feeling 1,000 small submissions. Honor was owed, not bestowed. It was the air I breathed, men's currency. I collected it like coin, each bow, each lowered head, each murmured title a small deposit into my esteem. The more they paid, the richer I became. A quiet, sacred certainty. I watched the procession of respect, my name made great. Greatness was a right, not a gift. The world arranged for me to stand above it. The king's favor, a crown earned by destiny. To be honored was to be seen as I truly was. The bows fed me, confirmations of my true image. Each lowered head, a mirror. I grew used to that reflection, the only face I recognized. Then came the gate. The city, a river of bodies and petitions. I stood where men made way, acknowledging rank. They bowed, they bent. Then I saw him, one man who did not bow. He stood among the throng, a single figure of refusal. The crowd flowed around him like water around a stone. The stone did not move. I thought my eyes deceived me. He looked at me, and in his gaze there was no fear, no calculation, no flattery. There was only the quiet of a man who would not be purchased by my presence. That refusal pierced me deeper than any insult. It was not the absence of a bow that wounded me so much as the implication. My honor was not absolute. My claim could be denied by a single human will. All the bows I had gathered shrank in the shadow of that one upright figure. In an instant, the ledger of my greatness was balanced by a single, stubborn debt unpaid. I replayed that moment until it became a drumbeat. Each repetition enlarged the slight, made it more deliberate, more insolent. I would see him again, the same immovable posture. The refusal multiplied. It became not an act by one man, but a verdict upon me. I felt mocked, diminished, as if some invisible hand had taken from me the very air I had thought mine. I told myself I was right to be angry. Honor, I argued, is not a charity. It is a debt owed by the lesser to the greater. To refuse to pay that debt is to deny order. Mordecai had refused to pay. He had refused to acknowledge the hierarchy. The refusal was not merely personal, it was contagious. If one man could stand and bowed, what prevented many from following? If one man could deny the king's steward, what prevented denying the king himself? Pride is a cunning teacher. It took my hurt and taught me to see threat where there was perhaps only stubbornness. It braided my grievance into a narrative of danger. I began to speak of Mordecai, not as a man but as a symbol, then as a people. The thought came to me like a seed. If one man of that nation would not bow, perhaps all of them would not. If one heart could resist me, perhaps an entire people harbored the same insolence. I listened to others, their words tinder to my flame. The whispers, the easy agreement, the sly encouragement, these voices shaped my hatred into policy. I was not alone in my thinking. I was surrounded by those who would profit from my certainty. Their counsel made my fear seem reasonable, my vengeance necessary. I told myself I acted for the empire, protecting the king by removing a seed of rebellion. I told myself punishment would restore order. So I went to the king with a plan wrapped in righteousness. I spoke with the smoothness of a man who had never doubted his own rightness. I painted Mordecai as a threat, a root of disobedience, a people whose presence would unsettle the peace. The king listened. He gave me leave to act. In that moment I believed I had done what any loyal steward would do. I had preserved the realm. My arrogance swelled. I took the king's assent as proof that the world turned on my axis. When Queen Esther invited me to a banquet, I read it as a coronation in miniature. The invitation was a mirror in which I saw my own importance magnified. I sat at the table and tasted triumph as if it were wine. The palace seemed to revolve around me. Every gesture, every courtesy, every careful word was a confirmation that I was untouchable. I believed my rise would never end. Then the world turned its face. At the banquet the king asked me, in a casualness that still stings, what should be done for the man whom the king delights to honor. I remember the ease with which I described the honors I would expect for myself: the royal robe, the horse with the king's signet, the procession through the city, the proclamation of praise. I spoke as if I were describing a ritual ode to my own name. I spoke with the certainty of a man who had never imagined being denied. And the king commanded that the very honors I had described be bestowed upon Mordecai. There are torments that are physical and torments that are of the soul. To clothe the man I despised in the king's robe was to feel my own skin stripped away. To place the signet upon his hand was to see my authority transferred. To lead him through the streets, to speak words of praise that I had rehearsed for my own ears. These acts were a slow unmaking. Each step of that procession was a nail driven into the coffin of my pride. I felt the eyes of the city upon me, and in their gaze I saw not the fear I had once commanded, but an ill, bitter amusement. Something inside me broke that day, not with a sound, but with a long, cold surrender. The fall that followed was swift and merciless. Esther revealed the plot. The king's face, once a source of warmth, became a furnace of wrath. I felt the ground tilt beneath me as the guards seized me. The hands that had once bowed now gripped me with a force that left no room for argument. I remember the taste of iron in my mouth, the sudden smallness of my body in the face of the law I had fought to bend. And then the gallows, the very scaffold I had raised for Mordecai, became my own. I had ordered its construction with certainty. How cruelly the world mocks the plans of men. The spike I had set for another became the instrument of my undoing. Pride, which had taught me to build monuments to my will, had fashioned the rope that would bind me. From this place beyond the veil I see, with a clarity that was denied me in life. Pride is a hunger that eats its own table. It turns honor into a ledger and men into debtors. It makes the world a market in which the soul is bought and sold for the price of a bow. I justified myself with reasons that now sound like the mutterings of a man who feared his own smallness. I blamed others. I blamed the people. I blamed necessity. But the truth is simpler and more terrible. I loved the reflection of myself more than I loved justice, more than I loved the king, more than I loved life. Listen, if you will, to this confession and this warning braided together. Pride blinds. It teaches a man to measure worth by the weight of other men's knees. It makes him believe that the world must be arranged to his liking. And when it is not, it convinces him that violence is a remedy. The pursuit of honor becomes a trap. The more one gathers, the more one fears its loss. And the fear breeds cruelty. I rose high, and I tasted the sweetness of that height. But the sweetness turned to ash. The very honors I demanded were the instruments of my ruin. The man who insists that others bow will one day find himself on his knees. Not in supplication, but in the cold, final silence of defeat. I speak now from the shadow of what I was. I do not ask for pity. I ask only that my voice be a caution. Pride is a mirror that shows a man his own face, until he forgets there are other faces in the world. Beware the hunger for honor. Beware the way it will teach you to see enemies where there are only neighbors, to see nations where there are only men. I rose, and I fell. Pride made the fall inevitable.